Yo guys, what is up? Max for Diablo 4 video, and today we're going over my Blightning Shred build. Now, this is a follow-up or a continuation of the Lightning Shred build that I posted last season that hit for the 1.8 billion damage. That has been nerfed, and I'm going to be honest, I didn't think Shred was going to be that great this season. I just saw that the waxing wasn't working with the barber, and I didn't think Shred was that great for pushing last season, and I put this build together and I walked into a nightmare. I think it was a 95 or a 96, and I did the entire thing first try without dying a single time. Wow, 0 deaths, 96. I was shocked at the amount of damage that we're putting out, and even more surprised by the amount of survivability that we got. This build is very tanky. I've set it up currently for Nightmare 100s, and it also does a lot of damage. It is one of the fastest clearing, if not the fastest clearing build in the game. It'll blast through lower content for you easily, and even has the audacity to speedrun Nightmare 100s. I hope you guys enjoy the build guide. Let's get right into it. So we're going to start with an overview of what is changing on this build, and then we'll get into the actual specifics. So to start us off, we're no longer using the Waxing Gibbous. Now, the Gibbous is really nice for blasting lower tier content. It was never great for pushing. It was never good for bossing. And this season, it just does not work with the Barber. When an enemy dies to a Barber explosion, the Barber explosion, the shadow damage, actually steals the kill. So the Waxing Gibbous reads that whenever you kill enemies with Shred, you're going to gain stealth. And if you test with the Waxing Gibbous and the Barber, even after the patches, with the changes to the Barber, you're still not ever getting ambush. Even if you're one-shotting enemies, you just never gain this stealth. So the waxing just doesn't work with the Barber. You could use the waxing without the Barber. However, I think that's just weaker because the waxing just isn't great for super endgame content. Now, in exchange of using the waxing, the big thing that you need to focus on is getting crit chance. Crit chance and attack speed are the two most important stats for this build. I actually don't have a lot of crit chance on my build right now, as I'm missing some important rolls, but crit chance and attack speed are the two most important things that you can find for this build. The other thing that we're adding is the aspect of the Blurred Beast. Now, I didn't use this in the 1.8 billion Lightning Shred because the Storm Claw was doing so much damage for us, and we just didn't really need it. That build was focused on blasting. However, for single targets, particularly in the Nightmares 90 and above, we need a way to scale up our single target damage, and the best way to do that is the aspect of the Blurred Beast. The combination that we're using here is +3 ranks of Toxic Claws. Now, +3 ranks of Toxic Claws allows our critical strikes over here. Whenever we critically strike with the werewolf skill, aka Shred, we're going to be getting 45% of our base damage as poison damage to those enemies, and that lasts for 5.3 seconds. Every time you critical strike, you're going to be stacking up more and more poison damage, so your crit chance to proc Toxic Claws becomes really important, and your attack speed to proc it as often as possible becomes even more important. What we're doing is basically spamming our Shred on single targets enemies, and then we're going to walk away and then dash in, and then we can detonate them with a huge amount of damage from this. This damage directly feeds into the Stormclaw damage, which can't crit, and then it's going to come out as a shadow damage through the Barber Heart, and it just synergizes really, really well. The last new thing that we're adding to the build is Debilitating Roar. Now, I actually cleared a Nightmare 100 dungeon first try without dying once before I even spec'd into Debilitating Roar, which is crazy. This build actually has pretty great survivability, but Debilitating Roar is the cherry on top. This allows us, whenever we're near a big pack of elites or something dangerous, we just proc this. We've got points into it to lower its cooldown, and it's going to give us 70% less damage dealt of our nearby enemies. It's going to fortify us, and it's going to heal us, and it's on a relatively low cooldown. Every time that you dash into a big pack, you're going to want to be saving this build, or saving this skill. The difference between you living and dying can be actually of good timing and use of your Debilitating Roar. Don't use this against trash mobs. Save it for the big elites. The big elites will be very, very easy to kill because they're just not going to damage you, and we can kill them in 4 seconds or less, which feels really great with this build. I don't usually put something like this in my videos, but I figured this might be helpful for some of y'all. I just want to do a quick little gameplay demonstration. So this build is all about snowballing. You do not want to just cold turkey go up to an elite. You want to kill ads. You really want to hit a lot of ads before you go and hit an elite. The reason for that is because every time we crit, we're going to be stacking up our crit damage, and you're going to get this build's just going to feel a lot better if you're kind of saving the elites for the last. So what I'm going to do here is I've got this totem. I know an elite is going to spawn here. So as soon as the ads come, I'm basically kind of like grouping them up and hitting them. The totem goes down. Here comes our elite. And you'll note that I'm saving. My thing is like kind of in the way, but I've saved all of my skills basically for this elite to spawn. So now that the elite is here, I'm not going to hit Debilitating Roar. I'm going to get real close to him. Debilitating Roar, they kind of just need to be on your screen. I'm popping my Hurricane for my damage reduction, popping Debilitating Roar, and I'm going to pop Blood Howl. I've now built up my thing. I'm going to hit him to make sure that he gets poisoned and he's vulnerable, and then basically go and hit another ad, and then boom, Blurred Beast right onto that elite, and there, let's see if I can get it. Schmack with the blurred, and we hit him for 21 million. If I had just kind of like walked up to that elite and not hit the ads before, I wouldn't have done nearly as much damage. You want to make sure that you're hitting the elite with your shred, making them vulnerable, making sure that you see the poison on them, walk away, boom, shred, dead. And as you're like building up that's going to feel really good for like just nuking elites in these high level dungeons. Now for our gear specifics, we are using the Tempest Roar. This is simply the best in slot item for the helmet slot. If you do not have a Tempest Roar, we're actually using less storm skills during our Grizzly Rage, so you can get away without using a Tempest Roar. You're just going to want to use a helmet with like armor, max health, cooldown, and probably willpower on it would be really nice, or basic attack speed could be kind of nice as well. But Tempest Roar is the best in slot. The main reason here is it's going to allow us to use our storm skills during our Grizzly Rage, so we can use Hurricane, we can use Storm Strike while we're in Grizzly Rage, which is great. Next up, we're using a chest piece. Now, for like anything that is probably Nightmare 80 or higher, I strongly recommend using a damage reduction chest piece. I've got damage reduction from distant, damage reduction from close, damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned, damage reduction, and then damage reduction while shapeshifted into a werewolf, plus max health gems. We'll talk about the max health gems in a second, but this makes me so tanky for Nightmares 80 and higher. For anything that is lower than that, you can get away with just using the Mad Wolf's Glee. This is going to give you +4 ranks when you are like fully level it up into your Shred, which is another like 40% damage for Shred, which is crazy. And I actually swap this on when I'm doing Nightmare 90s and highers for bossing. I'll just quickly swap this on. You don't need to change anything else, and this will give me a bunch more damage so that I can kill bosses faster. But for like general mobbing, you're really going to want the damage reduction. We don't need that much more damage. Next up, for your gloves, we're going to be using the god roll. Here is attack speed crit chance. You really need attack speed crit chance, and then ranks of Shred. I unfortunately have crit damage with werewolf skills. I'm missing a massive crit chance roll, which is why my bossing isn't as great as it could be. And then we're going to be using your core skills, deal increased damage based on your amount of fortify. We are going to be fortifying a lot on this build. We've got Grizzly Rage, which is constantly fortifying us, and Debilitating Roar is also going to be fortifying us a lot. And then we're also, whenever we get hit, we're going to be fortifying, and we're going to also be taking a lot of hits because we're going to be diving into enemies. Next up, for your pants, you could use the Temerities here. I'm going to recommend full armor / damage reduction pants instead. I haven't gotten the new Temerities to try, but I think these are for this build where you're diving into enemies. You're really going to want as much damage reduction as possible. I've got damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned, armor, damage reduction while fortified, damage reduction from distant, and then the disobedience aspect to give us even more armor. The percent armor rolls are going to work even better for you if you have the disobedience on. You're just going to get even more armor. Then on our boots, movement speed, spirit cost reduction, and a big one here is armor while in werewolf form. That is going to make you so much more tanky if you can get that armor while in werewolf form. And then we're using the Debilitating Roar is now a werewolf skill. In addition, Debilitating Roar will immobilize poisoned enemies. You need this aspect in order to use Debilitating Roar while we're in Grizzly Rage, and we're in Grizzly Rage like probably 90% of the time that we're playing this build, so you really want Debilitating Roar to be a werewolf skill. The reason you can't use it without is because we're making Grizzly Rage into a werewolf skill, so you wouldn't be able to use Grizzly Rage without this. If you're not using Debilitating Roar and you're blasting lower tier dungeons, you can just put on the while Hurricane is active, get +2 into your shapeshifting skills. That's another like 20% base damage that you're going to get, which is really nice. Lastly, for our weapon, you're really looking out for vulnerable and willpower is two big things. Crit damage on this build isn't super important because we're going to be stacking up a ton of crit damage while in Grizzly Rage. So big thing is vulnerable willpower, and then I've got crit and werewolf, crit werewolf and core skill damage. really nice. You definitely want an axe. The reason you want an axe is because we're going to be shredding into enemies and nuking them with the barber. The barber is going to hold enemies at that high health threshold, so we're going to deal way more damage to those healthy enemies. And then we've got crit strikes with shred, deal percentage of the damage dealt as lightning damage. Really, really good. Stormclaw is a must-have for this build. For our jewelry, I'm doing something a little bit weird here. I am swapping amulets. I've got a +3 Envenom amulet with cooldown reduction. Obviously, the God Roll amulet would be +3, either Envenom or Toxic Claws. I'll talk about that in a second. Cooldown, spirit cost, and like damage reduction or armor, or movement speed if you really wanted it. But +3 Envenom is really good for just deleting dungeons. You're gonna get that multiplier, that crit damage multiplier, which once again is good. Even though we've got a ton of additive crit damage, the crit multiplier is going to give us even more damage. So Envenom is really good. However, Envenom doesn't really do anything for us against single targets, because we're scaling a lot of our single target damage off of our poison damage. So for like most content slash like harder content, the Toxic Claws is really great because it's going to give us that single target damage, and we don't really have any issue deleting trash mobs. So if you're going to get anything, Toxic Claws is going to be the better amulet for like Nightmare Dungeons 80 and above, and then the Envenom amulet is going to be better for anything below, and you can just swap to the Toxic Claws amulet for bossing if you want. Envenom is going to give you those higher numbers, but Toxic Claws is going to give you that better damage against single targets. Then for our rings, God Roll here is crit chance, vulnerable damage, lucky hit, and then probably max life. Basically this, unfortunately, I've got really low rolls of crit chance on both of my rings. Here's another one with really low roll of crit chance. Just kind of unfortunate. I really need to get my crit chance up on this build. It's going to make my damage so much better, because we're going to get Storm Claws more, we're going to get Toxic Claws more. Just really got to work on that there. And then we're going to be using the critical strikes with core skills, increase your attack speed. Attack speed is so important on this build. You absolutely want it on your gloves. Absolutely want a high roll of this on your rings. We've got the Grizzly Rage shapeshift you into a dire werewolf here, which is also really important. Barber Heart, you're going to want to be looking for anywhere from 2 to like 2.8 seconds for most content. If you want to kill Lilith with this build, you can go up to 4 seconds, but 2 to 2.8 is your best range for the Barber Heart. And then for our totem, spirit cost reduction, crit chance, cooldown reduction, damage reduction while fortified, damage reduction while poisoned, lucky hit would also be really nice here, but spirit cost, crit chance, and cooldown are the most important things. And then I have yet to find a perfect roll of the 5 into Grizzly Rage, 5 seconds. Just can't find it, but I've got a 4 on right now. Now for your actual hearts for this build, the Barber is a must-have. You have to use the Barber. The other heart is the Brutal Heart that gives you the damage suppression. I believe this is called the Revenge Heart. This is just going to give you so much more damage reduction. It's a new source of just absorbing and soaking up all the damage. And the last heart is kind of up to you. I just haven't found a good heart slot, so I've just got a dead heart in here that you become immune for 2.2 seconds. Genuinely wouldn't recommend using this. It doesn't prevent against one-shots, so it's pretty useless. However, the 2 hearts that I would put in this slot are either the Inexorable Force Heart to pull enemies towards you, or the heart that your core skills actually consume life and then get a new damage multiplier is probably what I would go with for this build. The reason why you don't need the Inexorable Force Heart is because Shred feels best when you're dashing from enemy to enemy. That is when you have the most survivability. That is when you're going to be moving the most through the dungeon. If there's enemies over here and then you can dash to them, you're going to move through the dungeon faster. If the enemies that are over here get pulled over here, now you can't dash to them. That was a weird motion, but now you can't dash to them and you're technically going to be slower. So I don't think you need the Inexorable Force for this build. Actually, you could just go for the like core skills, deal more damage, and cost life, which would be really nice, but I haven't been missing it for this build. So yeah, just a note on that. For Spirit Bands, we're going to be taking Wariness. Reduced damage from elites is a must-have. We're going swooping attacks, must-have for the attack speed. We do not need the crit damage, trust me. We're absolutely going Calamity to extend the duration of our ultimate. We're absolutely going Calm Before the Storm. This Iron Feather is up to you. You could put it into Scythe Talons for a little bit more crit chance. You could put it into Bolster for when you use a defensive skill, you get more Fortify. You could put it into Masochistic for the lucky hit chance to heal yourself. I've just got it right now into Iron Feather for more maximum life. We're currently sitting at 16k life which feels really, really great. I just wasn't noticing great returns for Masochistic in terms of healing. I'm healing a ton without it, particularly now that we're using Debilitating Roar, which is going to give us a ton of health back, and we're casting it pretty often. Plus, Shred's always giving us health back. I just didn't feel like I needed this, so I went for the more base health. I messed around with the overload aspect. This was kind of fun, but just didn't see great returns from it. And bolster for even more. If you're going to use this, I would use the sapphires. You can put on the sapphires, and then just more damage or more fortified generation would also be really, really nice. For our skill tree, the biggest thing is that we lost Cyclone Armor. Now, we could use Cyclone Armor and no basic attack. That would be nice. However, Storm Strike is really great on this build because it is a chance to vulnerable. It's a 50% chance to vulnerable. If we are not using Storm Strike, we just don't have another way to vulnerable. We could swap Hurricane to give us a vulnerable chance, but the 20% less damage that adds deal when we have Hurricane on is so nice. So we're going to be using Storm Strike as a way if an enemy loses vulnerable, we just basic attack them twice. They're basically guaranteed to be vulnerable, and then we're putting points into Debilitating Roar. More points into this give us more cooldown. As you can see, we're getting 3 seconds of cooldown just from these points, which is really nice. So for the skill tree, Storm Strike for vulnerable, Heart of the Wild is going to give us maximum spirit. Core skills are going to give us more damage with wild impulses. We've got Digitigate Gate for more movement speed, more crit chance to close. Shred, you absolutely want the dashing Shred with the more crit damage. Not going for anything in the companion tree. Obviously grabbing Vigilance for the more damage reduction. Then we're going to be grabbing Blood Howl, and Blood Howl increases our attack speed. Really important. Attack speed is so good on this build. Then we've got Neurotoxin for the slow, Envenom and Toxic Claws for the poison stacking ability. Then we're going to be moving down here. We're not grabbing anything here, but mainly grabbing the defensive posture, more fortify. We're grabbing Nature's Resolve. Whenever we're struck, we have a chance to fortify, and unrestrained. When we do get crowd controlled, we're going to be crowd controlled for way less if we're fortified. And then lastly, Lupine Ferocity. Now, Lupine Ferocity is the best in slot here because it's going to give us those guaranteed critical strikes, and those critical strikes are going to deal more damage. With the loss of the Waxing Gibbous, I do think that this is best in slot because we want those critical strikes to pop, and when you're getting Lupine Ferocity to pop at the same time that your Toxic Claws and your Blurred Beast is proccing, you're going to see 20+ millions pretty consistently, which is awesome. Realized I still had like one unspent skill point. There's not really any great place to put this. The only 2 places I could put it in Abundance for more basic skill generation. Don't really need that. I'm just going to slap that last point into Neurotoxin for a increased slow on enemies. Should give us more crowd control and a little bit more survivability for that extra slow. Now let's talk Paragon. For our Paragon board, we're rocking 5 glyphs and 3 legendary nodes. We've got the Werewolf node. We've got almost 80% more damage while in werewolf form and damage reduction while in werewolf form. We've got the Spirit Glyph. This is going to give us increased critical strike damage, and more importantly, a crit multiplier on enemies whenever we critically strike them. A damage multiplier every time. For our Paragon board, this is basically the same Paragon board I ran for our Lightning Shred, our 1.8 billion. For our Paragon board, this is basically a slightly tweaked version of our 1.8 billion Lightning Shred Paragon board with a little bit more emphasis on poison damage because we're adding that into the build. So the glyphs that we're running are going to be the Exploit Glyph for more vulnerable damage, the Spirit Glyph for the more crit damage, but more importantly, the crit multiplier whenever we crit an enemy, the Werewolf Glyph for more damage reduction and damage while in werewolf form. The Tracker Glyph is a new must-have addition. You really need this in order to get mileage out of the stacking poison damage because it's going to make your poison damage effects last 33% longer, which just is going to make the Blurred Beast aspect so much better. And then lastly, the Fang and Claw Glyph, more damage to enemies that are close to us. So I've actually got a ton of survivability spec here, a lot of like healing and armor nodes. So we've got in our first board, more damage, more max life, more armor. We're getting the 30% vulnerable damage, more damage. We're grabbing a ton of attack speed nodes. First board, like almost 80% more damage while we're in our werewolf form and damage reduction. We're also going to be grabbing the Lust for Carnage. I go this board first because if you're going to want to try this build, you're going to really want Lust for Carnage as fast as you can possibly get it for the spirit regen that it's going to give you. Then we're going to be dipping over into the Inner Beast board. Inner Beast, we're not touching. We don't need this, but we are going to grab the 200% more armor here, the 100% more armor here, the max life, all these max life nodes, and we're going to be putting the Spirit Glyph here, more damage with our shape-shifting skills, popping down real quick to the Ancestral Guidance board for more Spirit regen that we're going to get, and more Spirit on kill, or sorry, not more Spirit regen. Every time we spend 75 Spirit, we'll deal 30x increased damage for 5 seconds. This is a massive multiplier for all of our damage. This is really, really great. And then we're popping up and over, grabbing more attack speed, more damage, which is really great. Then we're going Fang and Claw. This is my favorite spot to put the Fang and Claw glyph. It's going to give us 150% to all of our magic nodes, and we care about all of these magic nodes. More damage to poison enemies, more damage to poison enemies, more damage to poison enemies, damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned, damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned, damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned. We're also getting damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned, and 20% more damage to poison enemies. Absolutely love this. This is in the Heightened Malice board, and then we're doing a little loop-de-loo here to grab the 20% more damage to poison enemies, more damage to elites, more damage to poison enemies, more poison damage for our Blurred Beast aspect, and then pathing up here to get the more max life, and then Heightened Malice, 45% damage multiplier whenever poison enemies are nearby. And then we're popping into the Thunderstruck board mainly for the damage reduction from vulnerable enemies, which is really nice. And this is where we're going to put our tracker glyph for the more damage to poisoned enemies, and poison effects last longer. And that is the Thunderstruck board. Here is kind of like a broad look at the board, and that is there. Guys, that is going to do it for the build video. I hope you enjoyed. I was like genuinely shocked at how good Shred was. Not because I thought Shred was bad, I just never really pushed high nightmares with Shred, and doing a Nightmare 100 or Nightmare like 96 without dying my very first time, unlike pretty credit gear, kind of blew me away. This build is definitely a build that if you put the time and effort into min-maxing it, it's going to basically do all the content for you. Really fast, really fun, good survivability, great damage. Not the best bossing damage, especially when compared to NATO and Bulwark. I know I'm going to get asked that. This won't kill bosses quite as fast as like NATO or Bulwark in Nightmare 100, but it does the job just fine. Guys, that is going to do it for the video. I will catch you on the next one. Take care. Peace.